Thought Radio, music from all your favorite New Thought artists. From Jamie Lula, Karen Drucker, Gary Lynn Floyd, Ricky Byers, Daniel Nahmod, Eddie Watkins Jr., and many, many more. 24/7 New Thought Radio. Positively inspiring.
Well, greetings and welcome. This is the New Thought Media Network. I'm Ken Ludwig, and you are watching the Vibrant Living Hour. Hope this day finds you safe, healthy, and happy as always, and you are absolutely living your best life in every single way, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And whatever you're doing, I hope that's the way it's working for you. You know, today's kind of an interesting day for me. I'm kind of branching out into different areas of who I interview. I don't want to just preach to the choir. I don't want to just bring us the same people who say and think the same things that most of the rest of us say and think that would pay attention to New Thought Media Network. So I have with me today a brand new author, a first-time author, someone who has written their very first book. I'm going to read the intro before I bring her on. Her name is Graham E.E. Bailey, and this is her biography from her book, and I love this biography. With boundless energy and enthusiasm, she grew up developing a rich imagination that she conveyed through storytelling. Following a multi-decade career in the creative field of marketing and advertising, she's now inspired to craft tales of suspense. She lives in the suburban wilds of Long Island with her husband and her daughter, Samantha. So I would like to bring on right now Graham E.E. Bailey. Graham, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Cool. You know, as I said there before I introduced you, I really don't do, I guess the way to say it is I don't do novels. I don't read novels. I've read 3 novels in the last 20 years. All the books that I read are consciousness, spiritual development, metaphysics, the stuff the woo-woo stuff that I love. But in all honesty, I just got the book, and here's the book, folks. It's called Sakhalin. Is that what? Do I pronounce that right, or do you use the?
That's right, Sakhalin. Mm-hmm.
Sakhalin. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've heard it pronounced different ways. I've heard people say Sakhalin or Sakhalin, and it's like, well, okay, whatever. It's Russian, so I don't care. But this is
I'm saying it wrong as well.
My beloved Lisa reads herself to sleep every single night, and she started reading it last night and said it was a real page turner. She absolutely loved it. Great. And I just started reading the first couple of chapters earlier today, and I really, really, really like the style. It's really cool, and you get the feeling from the very outset that this is going to be suspenseful. I didn't know that was going to be a tongue twister. But the interesting piece about all of this for me is this show is about living your best life, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And I hope everybody's doing that at every stage of their lives. But I think you get to be a certain age, and I think it's different for each of us. It can be in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s. Doesn't really matter. People get to a stage where they're like, wow, there's some things I have not done in this life that I really want to do. And you're not a kid, and you're retired. You're retired, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that'll give people an idea. We don't need to tell everybody how old you are, but it'll give them an idea that you're not 30 or 40. So
I saw those, and I'm on the other side of those.
There you go. Yeah, all in the rearview mirror. But I think one of the most fascinating pieces about your story is the idea that you're following a dream that you've had for a while later in life. And can you just speak to that a little bit for folks who are interested in what that feels like? For those of us who might be out there going, you know what? I want to do this, but I'd like to pursue this, but I've always wanted to do this, but you eliminated the buts.
Right. Or as they say, get off your butts.
Get off your butts.
And go and do it. Well, I have to say that my journey was kind of a confused one. I started out, I don't want to go back way to the beginning when the earth cooled, but right after the earth cooled and I was born, I struggled in school with English spelling, writing, and reading. So luckily, I was a pretty good artist, and I ran with that, and I made a whole career out of being an artist. So I never really had to do much reading, writing, or spelling. And what ultimately happened was everything was going along great. I worked for a big corporation, and I was pretty successful at doing what I was doing until email came about. And you can't live in corporate America anymore without knowing how to do email. And so I do an email, and I was in shock. Now, all my correspondence would not be in person, which is what I'm so good at, but I have to do it on email. So I'd type an email, and I'd walk over to a coworker, and I'd say, "Could you read this?" And they'd say, "It's one line. Why would I be reading that?" And I'd just say, "Just read it for me." Because now really I felt like an imposter, right? Because I really didn't have the ability to correspond this way. So fear is a great motivator in a lot of ways. For me personally, it always was a pretty good motivator. There's an expression, it's okay to have butterflies in your stomach if you can get them to fly in formation.
Right.
And that's what was happening when I was trying to figure this all out. I became a really good emailer. I learned all the words I needed to write. I learned how to put a sentence together. So it brought me a huge amount of confidence. And if it wasn't by that fear factor of losing my job because I wasn't competent, that was literally what was going to happen. And that's what I did. So I learned to be a pretty good emailer. At the same time, I had moved to Long Island, far out on Long Island, and my train ride was 2 hours each way. So it was 4 hours a day. That's a very long time to be on the train. And I'm a person who never likes to waste time. And I thought to myself, the only way I could prevent a possible murder-suicide on the railroad was to occupy my mind in a proper way. And I had my laptop with me, and I was a little better writer at that point because I had to be forced into it. I said, you know what? No one's going to know I'm going to write a little story, a book. And I'm not going to tell anybody. And I never did. I rode the train every day, back and forth. And we won't say exactly what year that was, but I was certainly starting it in my 50s. And I never thought that I was too old to start or that it was not the right. I thought I started to write it before really before self-publishing became popular. So I thought to myself, I'll need an agent. And I said, you know what? That's all down the road. First, you have to come up with a book. So I just kept writing. I said, I'll figure it out as I go. By the time I was done with the book, everybody was self-publishing. So my first big hurdle that I thought was the thing that would stop me never came to be. So I tried to get an agent. I went through the motions. Nothing happened. And then I went to self-publishing. And that's sort of how it worked out for me. But as far as doing something you thought you could never do, there was certainly a person 40 years ago that this was not possible, impossible for me to accomplish this. And it was not my skill set. It was nothing I could do to make it my skill set. I really didn't believe I would have the ability to do such a thing. And it was just it was my own private little adventure. Nobody knew I was doing it. And as the ball started to roll, then I started to open up a little bit, told my husband about it. And he was sort of like, well, go ahead. He was really encouraging. But again, it's a kind of thing you don't think that you're going to start. I really believe any time is a good time to start something that speaks to you. And this was just something that spoke to me. So I did it in conjunction with working full time. So I found the time to do it. People always say, I don't have the time. You know what? You do have the time. If it means a lot to you, you'll get it done.
Yeah. And you had those 2-hour pockets on the train. I took the Long Island Railroad into New York City for 4 years of high school. I didn't have 2 hours. I only took 45 minutes. But I know that is, that can be pretty dead time. And if you don't have something to keep yourself occupied, it can be pretty boring and annoying time. And to pick something up that you're enjoying doing and you're excited about and you're exercising your imagination, that's fascinating to me. That's a great use of the time. I think so many people, you said it never occurred to you that you were too old or you didn't have the time. So many people step into whatever it is in life, whether it's a side career, a side gig. People in my industry, so many people get started in my industry as a little side hustle that they're going to make a little money at. And the first thing they say is, I have a full-time job. I don't have enough time. everybody has those little pockets of time. Everybody has those little windows in which they can do something. They get
Right.
something. In your case, incredibly productive. I meant to look and I didn't look. How many pages are in this book?
404, but it's a quick read. Everybody's going to tell you it's a quick read.
But 404 pages you put together during your windows.
That's right.
Which is pretty extraordinary. And I love the fact that we all have an imagination, and I think so often imagination is learned out of us or beat out of us because we get stuck in the throat every day. Same thing over and over and over again. I got a good friend, Barry Ebert, wrote a song called Fathers and Sons, I think is the name of the song, but he has this one great line. Just goes, we go from work to bar to bed and back again. It just seems like so many people live in that life. That's all it is.
True.
And I don't know anybody really. I shouldn't say that because that's not true. I know for my own self, there are unfulfilled dreams in my heart, and I believe they're in every heart. And I think it's really important that people venture out, take the first step, which is what you did.
Right.
Even with whatever difficulties you had before that, with English or however that translated for you, to just step forward and go ahead and do it and put to pen your imagination, which I think is fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to getting further in the book because it is you can tell, like I said, at the very beginning of it, it's like, wow, this is going to be suspenseful as hell. It's got a feel.
I think that one of the things about my own personality, because I'm pretty much on full throttle all the time. I never sit down. I never stop moving. Even my husband says we're in the car. He said, so see, we're driving along in the car. You're not moving. I said, but the car is moving. As long as something's moving. So I never actually stopped moving. So when I started to write, one of the things I was really conscious of is the fact that I consider myself the common man. And I was writing it. I thought to myself, as I'm reading it back, is it keeping my interest? Because I have this much interest. So I thought, well, if it's keeping my interest and I've read it 100 times, then I think I have something good here. And that was one of the things that spurred me on, because I thought, well, and also too, my editors were amazing. Mary and John Dealman, they were incredible editors, and they kind of helped piece things together at the end. So, but I think that it's a pretty suspenseful piece of work. Don't be afraid by 404 pages. So it moves quick.
I'm excited to read the book. Just because I'm excited to read the book. It's that simple. And reading those first couple chapters got me excited about reading the rest of it. And of course, my wife's review didn't hurt at all when she's like, wow, it's a real page turner. I love it.
Right.
That really helps. That really makes it something. What led to the idea, this whole Russia thing, and Sakhalin, that whole idea. Sakhalin is an island, for those who don't know, right on the farthest eastern Russian territory or part of Russia.
That's right. Yep. It's 6 miles from Japan, and it's a pretty big island that people have never heard of. And it's been in dispute for a very long time between Russia and Japan. At different times, the countries owned it at one point. My husband and I went to Sakhalin to adopt our daughter. I had never heard of the place. We went to an adoption agency. The agent there was from Sakhalin, and that was her connection. So she knew people there, and she could get us into the orphanages that were there. So I was really busy in my full-time job, a lot of pressure in my corporate designing job. So at the time, I basically did no research on the place where I was going. I had no time to really worry about it. And I was working the day that I left to get on the plane to go to Russia. So consider the fact that you've had no time to even fantasize about this place. Give it any consideration. Really, the idea of adopting a child was really all we were really thinking about, not the place itself, just that you were going to the other side of the world to accomplish this thing. So I left for the airport. We get to Russia 11 hours later, and it's another flight there. And when we get to Sakhalin Island, I am literally on the other side of the world. So much so when I would call my office, I'd say, what time is it? And they'd tell me, and then I'd say, and what day is it?
Yeah.
Didn't have any idea because I couldn't keep track. So it was so surreal because with no prepping, no background, no even visual reference to where we were going. In the rush to get there, I got off at the plane on Sakhalin Island in the city called Yuzhno-Sakhalin. And it's a very kind of, it's a beautiful place, kind of would remind you of Nova Scotia or Maine, some pretty good sized hills, mountains, ski resorts, that kind of place. But when I got off at the airport, it was like being transported to another planet. And the first person we saw who picked us up at the airport was the van driver from the orphanage. And he was middle-aged guy, kind of interesting looking, an interesting look on his face, and he didn't speak any English. We couldn't talk to this guy at all, but he kept nodding and pointing. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy drives the van for the orphanage. That can't be much of a full-time job. Wonder what this guy does all the time. What do the people do here? What kind of world is this that they live in? It's kind of, Russia has a lot of third world kind of vibe to it. And I'd look around and people were living in poverty. A lot of the Soviet Union leftover situation was still there with the real cement buildings, that kind of thing. So I get a real feeling for this place. And I looked at my husband walking down the street one day. I said, I could write a story about this place. And it all kind of flooded into my head, just walking down the street and looking at the place. I said, I wonder what that van driver does in a place like this. And that's the story. That van driver inspired my main character. It is a fictitious novel. It is not about him, but he was the inspiration for it because I didn't know who he was. An important part of the book is that he couldn't communicate with us. And that's also kind of an important part. So I wanted to know who these people were. And so since I couldn't figure it out, I just invented it myself. And we have a beautiful daughter. She's 20 years old. I call her my Russian princess. And I like to relive the moment. So it kind of wove in an imaginary way into the story that I was writing. And to be totally truthful, I think my story about adopting my daughter, to me personally, is a beautiful story. But I'm just like anybody else. I like to watch a great, exciting movie. I love when there's a lot of action. And I'm just like the rest of the world. A great, exciting book or a great, exciting movie or some kind of media, I think is a thrill for me. So I wasn't going to write some story about me personally. Instead, I just imagined, how do we make this, an exciting story for me to read over and over again to make it the right book for me to write? And that's kind of where it all came to pass. That's how it all happened.
Wow. Very cool. That's very cool. It's very exciting just to hear you the way you express it, that this kind of whole different, it really, I can only imagine that it's a whole different universe to step off a plane in this place that nobody's ever heard of, really, like you said.
No idea what it was about.
The biggest island that no one's ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
So you've written the book.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, of course, we started out with the idea that you're not a kid. This is a later in life accomplishment, if you will. What does it feel like? What does it feel like for Graham Bailey to just be in this space of having accomplished this?
It spurs me on to do even more. That is how I feel. I am in shock. Half of me is in shock. A good friend of mine asked me once, she said, are you prouder of the story or of the accomplishment? And by far, the accomplishment is all that I really focus on, because there's a lot of people out there like me who think about starting things, but never really so great about finishing things. And my husband always said, I'm a big gardener. My husband always tells me, he says, you're a really good planter, but not a great weeder. So I get really excited at the beginning and then things sort of taper off. And I think what it was an important thing to me when I was doing this was I really believed I wasn't smart enough to write this book initially. And what I thought to myself is, I know how the story starts. It's very clear to me how it started. And right away, I knew exactly how it was going to end. So I actually wrote the book. I wrote the beginning and I wrote the end. Now, I don't know how other writers write. I do know how other writers write, and not all of them do that particular technique. And I wouldn't recommend it to people who are considering writing a book, but that's how it worked for me. And I think I'm in the middle of my second book, and I have an outline for a third, and I'm approaching them the exact same way because that was how I worked, But it was the accomplishment of getting it done was, I realized that I'm not talking about really working. I'm talking about, it's not about working till I can't work anymore. It's about doing what I want to do until I can't do it anymore. And if this book is successful, that's great. But I didn't write that book for anybody but myself. And I believed if I put enough effort and heart into it, it would speak to other people and it would be a success on its own. So I have yet to, prove that. It's just starting, but I feel like it's opened up a whole bunch of other avenues for me because now I realize if I could do that, I could probably do the other things on my list to do.
Yeah, or at least take that first step in the direction. As I get older, the famous quote from Martin Luther King is always in my mind, that faith is taking the first step when you can't see the whole staircase. And
That's right.
I think that's really a great way to look at life when you're looking at those challenges or those heart's desires that you want to accomplish, that you're just not sure where to start, or you're not sure, or as you said, you're not smart enough, whatever that is. And I love that you did it for you. I just recently, yesterday, I think, for the first time, read a quote from Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. Keith Richards is my personal all-time favorite musical person of any stripe, anywhere, anytime. The man is a walking, talking genius. People don't know that about him. He's got a home in Weston, Connecticut with a huge library in it, and he's read every book in the library. And people are like, Keith Richards reads books.
Can you read?
Yeah, right, exactly. Is that between getting high? He was talking about the music, and he was talking about retiring, and he said he will never retire. He will continue to play music until he falls over. And the reason is because people don't understand. He doesn't do it for the money, and he doesn't do it for the crowd. He does it for himself because it's what he loves more than anything in the world, is to play music. And I think when you step into that space, you become as accomplished at whatever it is as a Keith Richards. When you're doing something you truly love, and you take the time to work at it. And my favorite 3 words: practice, practice, practice. That's how you get good at anything. And that's really, I had no idea that you had a second book in the works and a third one on the drawing board. I mean, that's amazing. From I'm not smart enough to write this book to the third one's on the drawing board. That's pretty fascinating. And it's got to give you a great sense of, I was going to say invincibility. It's a great sense of, I can do anything.
Yeah, it's really more than that. It's kind of looking down the road. And again, I had a really long career in corporate America, so obviously I'm on the other side of that. But you don't really feel that as an ending. You just feel what I'm moving forward now into another beginning. And it's so exciting for me to kind of like plan that out. Now you have time to really do whatever you want. And it's a very special thing to be able to look at a day and say how you are going to break it up, not how your manager needs you to break it up, but to spend each day, right, the way you have your 8 hours that you devoted to another company, a mission, whatever that was, and now it's your opportunity, right? So you think your whole life, if I had the time, what would I do with it? Do whatever you want with it. But at the end of the day, you want to look back and think you did something productive to make yourself happy, and to feel like you can never, I don't feel you should ever stop learning, right? And
Right.
and developing whatever craft you have, and if it's music or art or writing or if it's all those things. Take the
Yeah.
time to explore what makes you feel good and whole.
And all that exploring and all of that, just delving into those things that make you happy, that you love, they are personal development as well. You find out a lot about yourself, as you found out about yourself by writing the book, that there's more to who I am than what I think I am. And it's
Exactly. Yeah.
and the well, I just had a thought about that. I didn't want to forget the gardening reference from earlier, that your husband told you you're a great planter but not much of a weeder. My wife and I are lifelong gardeners and totally get the weeding thing. Anyway, just another subject altogether, but I was never a great weeder either. Not my favorite deal. Planting and harvesting, everything in between, not so much. The the sense of following your dreams, the sense of doing something that you didn't know or think you could do. The question that I have in my head is, of all the things that you may have wanted to do in your life, where did writing a book fit in to that picture? Was that something that you ever
Sorry,
ever
Ken.
thought about until later on?
I'm sorry. Just say that one more time. You cut out for a second.
Oh, did I really? We got a little bit of internet interruption here. Every once in a while you're cutting out too, but that's
Yep.
okay. We'll always get through it. It's what you do when you work with the internet. The idea that you're following your heart's desire. You're doing the things that you want to do. You've got the time to do what you want to do in the world. But in the great scheme of all the things that you've ever wanted to do, was writing a book ever in there until you got to the point where you just started doing it?
That was never, I really didn't ever believe I had the ability to do it. So it was never on my to-do list. 100% not on my to-do list. So that was never, it only happened literally because I was given parameters. I was on the train. So you can't paint on the train. You can't, I guess you could learn piano, but you would be struggling. So all the things I wanted to get better at were not possible on the train. All I had was a laptop computer, right? And in that computer, and you couldn't even get Wi-Fi on the train because it was too sporadic. So you really couldn't watch, you could watch movies, I guess, but I thought that was kind of a huge waste of my time. So with what I had to work with, I said, well, what can I do with a computer for an hour and a half, 2 hours a day? I said, let me just put some thoughts down. And the more I worked on it, I would get lost in it, so much so that I looked forward to the train ride. Sometimes I'd almost miss my stop because I'd be in the middle of a thought and I'd be like, wow, oh my God, we're here already? I'm packing up my stuff. I rode the train, man, he sat across from me for 4 years. He didn't know my name. I didn't know his name, but we'd say, hi, how are you? Beautiful day, good weather. And then I'd open up my computer and I'd put on my headphones and I'd listen to music while I wrote. And every day I'd say to him, good speaking with you. I'm going to start working again. And after 4 years, he looked at me and he said, you're writing a book. I said, how did you know that? He said, what else could you be doing? There's nothing else you could be doing every day. You know, he couldn't think to himself, like, this woman's trying to avoid me. There's no way she'd go through all this every single day.
That's fabulous.
So he just see me like.
That's wild. That is really, that's truthfully a great story. That he figured that out over time, over 4 years. Is that how long it took to write the book? Did it take 4 years to write it?
No, it took me a lot longer than that.
Did it really?
Yeah, there was a big learning curve there. And again, it wasn't, you get on the train and, you'd be writing, but like I said, I really wasn't much of a writer when I started. By the time I got done, I thought I had improved quite a bit. But so it took me all the back and forth. That's how you come up with 404 pages. It took me over 8 years to do. So
over 8 years. Okay.
Over 8 years. Yeah. Over 8 years. But I kind of, once I went back and started reading it over and over again, because you're developing these characters and you want to keep them fresh in your mind and you want them to be true to who they are. Each character has their own personality, and they have to be true throughout this thing, so they're genuine or authentic. So if it takes you that long to write something, you're certainly reading it back a lot. So and trying to keep it fresh in your head.
I totally get that. Once upon a time, I kind of put it aside. I don't know, 8 years ago maybe, but once upon a time, I was doing the same thing. I was writing a book myself, and I've got stashed on a thumb drive somewhere 40,000 words towards a book. And somewhere in there, as I was writing the book, it dawned on me I was writing the book that everybody told me I should write, and it wasn't the book that I wanted to write. And that kind of brought me to a screeching halt. I was done. But I get the idea of having to, when you don't write like consistently and you don't have like a daily method of operation to do it. I read the same stuff over and over and over again an awful lot of times to try and keep what I had written fresh in my mind so I could have some continuity to what I was trying to put together. That's an interesting piece when it takes you a long time.
Exactly, yeah.
But I'm assuming, I'm going to guess that the second book is coming along considerably quicker than the first.
Sorry? Say that again.
We're having a little bit of internet breakup there. I'm assuming that the second book is coming along a little bit faster than the first.
Yeah. Yes. The second book is going much faster than the first one. The second book actually was something that I had, I don't know why, but these stories just sort of come to me, and it's just the idea of the story. So you kind of know what you want to happen. And the second one was an idea I had for a very, very long time. And unfortunately or fortunately, it is not the same genre. It is more science fiction.
Wow.
Yeah, but oddly enough, the second story and the third story, I know this sounds totally mad, but they are actually happening simultaneously. I'm imagining the stories at the same time. Depending on the day or how I'm feeling, I can conjure up each story individually and kind of run it on two separate tracks. It's almost as if you're watching television and you're watching two different series on two different nights. And
Wow.
And that's just the way my mind works. So I can bounce from one thing to another like that. I don't know if that's probably not probably a good idea or very common, but that's sort of how my brain works.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's and there's something that, as you express that, something inside of me says, "Wow, that's fabulous!" Like it's a great idea, to have two books occurring simultaneously, not only in your head but actually maybe in their telling. That's kind of fascinating. That's kind of it's and certainly leads you to sequels. It leads you, maybe you've got a whole brand going there. You'll have the movies will start next. Making movies out of these books.
I can only hope.
You can only hope. I guess in this day and age, that's got to be where the money is, right? Because it's I will never read a book on a Kindle. I will always have a hard copy of a book in my hands. I love the feel of a book, but that's not necessarily the way the world is right now. I love this. By the way, I love the cover of this book. It's beautiful. It doesn't say a whole lot of anything to me. I'm sure as I get into the book farther, it'll mean something. But I love the way it looks. Anyway, and I do want to say, I can see, I have a little window here that tells me there are people watching the show. And if you're out there, please just go to the comments, say hi. If you've got a question for Graham, or if you'd like to know more about her book, which I just held up, and I'll hold it up again because somebody else just popped on. Sakhalin, if you are interested in knowing more about this, please click on and or make a comment and let us know you're here. And ask questions. I love to make this interactive. That's always the most fun. Because sometimes I run out of questions. I never run out of things to talk about. I just run out of questions when I have a guest. That happens once in a while. You know what? There's, and we got a question here from Lisa. Lisa says, how do you keep track of the characters from one story to another?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
How do you keep track of the characters from one story to another?
How do I keep track of the characters from one
story to another?
From one story to another?
Well, or even one chapter to another throughout the book. How do you keep track of the characters? If you got a lot of characters and you mentioned that earlier. I mean, trying to keep track of them,
I
keep them the
yeah.
same person all the way
What
through.
happened was, what happened was, I had the setup of all the characters. I knew what they were all going to start to do, and how they would kind of meet each other, and how they would all interface at the beginning. And I understood that. And then I also, like I said, I wrote the back first. Also, at the same time, I wrote the end of the story. And then there was the tricky part. I didn't know, I never really thought I had the ability to write the middle of the story, the thing that weaves it all together. So I had the setup and I had the end. But putting that together, that's the real story, isn't it? That's the hard part. And I knew I can't really do a hard part. I can only give you an idea of what these characters are sort of going to do. So I got to a place where I was stuck. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write the front of the story and continue to write it. And I'm going to go to the end of the story and write it backwards. That sounds like madness, but the front met the back. A little crazy, right? So but I wanted to keep writing, and I knew. So the characters were doing one thing at the beginning of the book, and all along in the back of my mind, though, I said, ultimately they're all going to wind up at that one place. How do they all get there? And why would they all be there together? So I just kept asking questions that I had to create answers for. And that's how I developed those characters. So they're experiencing something, and then I solve it every time. Why did she say that? What happens to her? Where does she go? So I just kept answering questions for them because I knew how they were going to end up. And I don't know if writers know how their story is going to end, but since you know how it's going to be, it's like watching a TV show and you're watching the beginning and you go in to get the popcorn and you come back and what happened? Now the thing's almost over. Well, that was the part I had to figure out. So you could create a million different scenarios to get those two pieces together. And that was the biggest challenge of the book. And I think that happened to me. Solving that came to a major moment. I was in the car listening to another author being interviewed. And she said, the most frightening thing about writing is starting a book. And I thought to myself, this is a very well-known author, and I would never be afraid to start at all. I could start every day a new story. It's the middle. I thought, well, she's a great author. She doesn't have a problem with the middle. And then I realized my fears were, everybody has problems and worries and concerns about pursuing something. So when I realized she couldn't start, I said, well, hell, I can start and finish. I just don't know what's going on in between. Right. So it was kind of repetitious. And I think more important than how the storyline goes is if your characters, if you care about them and they have more than one dimension to them, then you know how they're going to react. You know how they get to the end and how they would get there.
Right. Got a couple of comments here from Mary. Mary says she's reading the book, obviously, and she said, I just met Sasha and she loves him. Whoever Sasha is. I haven't gotten to Sasha yet. But this is a great question. Since the adoption of your daughter was really kind of the motivating factor behind all of this, or at least the trip to do that, what does your daughter say about this? What is Sam's comments? Does she have any input around, has she read the book? Is she reading the book? What does she think about the whole thing?
She's reading the book now, and I've read enough books. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks. I've seen a lot of movies, and I feel I know what kept my interest, what components you need to have in a book. So part of it is there is some adult situations, and my daughter. So that's a kind of thing you have to come to terms with your daughter, to say there's adult content in here. And she looks at me, she says, Mommy, I'm so proud of you. And she's read her own share of books. So that's the good news about taking 8 years to write it, because you don't have to explain it to a 10-year-old. Now I'm explaining it to a 20-year-old, and it seems okay. Right. After all, she is 20, right? So, sure. Right.
Takes the pressure off.
Right. She has her own adult situations that so now that she's an adult, it's a little easier to do that. But yeah, she has ever unfolding adult situations. Yeah, that's right. So I think she's really proud of it, and she, I think is a little surprised that I was able to do it, because she really never even knew I was doing it, and I kind of said, "Oh, I kind of did this," and it was kind of a surprise to most everybody who knows me.
That's very cool. So here's a silly question here from
Mhm.
the comments section here.
Okay.
Why don't you have a New York accent?
I do. All week I've been working on getting rid of it. It
Yeah.
has been a struggle. But I grew up here. I'm one of the people.
Well, you
So
know what?
forget about it.
I grew up in New York, and I had the New York accent when I came out here to Colorado. I've been in Colorado for 46 years, and every once in a while, somebody will say to me, "You're from the East Coast, aren't you?" They'll pick up on it. But then
Right.
when I go back to New York, I get people give me a hard time about how the way I speak when I go back to New York. They're like fascinated by the fact I know there's an R in New York.
Yeah.
It's like, so
Well,
I get it there too.
I'm on my best behavior this afternoon. I'm trying.
And we so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Another interesting question here. And by the way, anybody who's out there, if you've got a question for Graham, please put it up. Or anything about her book. I see because the people come in and out because it's the internet. The book is Suckhalin. If you want to know a little bit more about this, and we'll get to at the end of the show, I'll definitely flash you ways to get the book. But if you want to know anything, if you have a comment, please feel free to ask. And I think this one person must have missed this earlier. Are you self-published? And everything is self-published now, right? Pretty much.
Yes.
So you are self-published.
Yes.
And your book is available on Amazon, but also on your website?
The website will drive you to Amazon,
Right to
Barnes
Amazon.
and Noble, and Archway Publishing. So it's available at all of those locations.
Excellent.
Sites. And it's also as an ebook.
That's very good coverage. That's very cool. Someone here wants to know, or Mary again wants to know, is anybody in your family or anyone you know on their way to Suckhalin or planning to visit there?
When I went to Sakhalin Island, it was through this agency out on Long Island. And unfortunately, politically, over the years, Russia has been shut down to adoption.
Right.
Which is a very hard thing for me to even talk about, because people, when I came back from Russia, people were asking me, "Oh, what was it like? And was it so sad to leave the orphanage?" And what I realized was, as with everywhere in the world, there's one thing you can say about every country and every government: the Russians love their children too, and they wanted the best for those children. And there were hundreds and hundreds of children in those orphanages. And unfortunately, because of the political situation, they had shut their doors. And who really suffers, obviously, are all those children left behind. And it was a very eye-opening experience. And with no funds and no money, they ran these orphanages with nothing. And you were allowed to donate a gift. And one of the gifts that the orphanage didn't have, people had put money together to buy them a washing machine. With 100 children living there, they didn't have a washing machine to wash the clothes for these children. If you think about that, and they had the glass bottles, baby bottles, with the little rubber nipples from the ones you'd see in cartoons from the 20s. So the places were clean, but it was a very intense experience to see those children that no one was coming to get. Beautiful, hundreds of children we saw.
Wow. So the island itself, is it a place that people would visit for any other reason, or that you're aware of? You mentioned earlier on that there was ski mountains there. Is there?
It was, I think,
tourism?
for the local people. It was the big city there is Yuzhno-Sakhalin, and it's a big oil area, because the Russian oil fields are out there, and that's really the driving commerce from a place like that.
Okay.
So, but it was where we stayed. We stayed in a lovely hotel. The town itself was interesting enough, and it was a mix of modern and post and pre-Soviet Union kind of environment, but it's a very natural place. Hunters, skiing, hiking, and it's not like Siberia. Again, it's just north of Japan, so the climate it's less intense and less
Right.
harsh.
Right.
So
That is
it was really a very beautiful place in a natural sort of way.
Interesting. That's cool. So I was going to ask you this question earlier, and it just popped up in the comments again from Mary. You wrote the book taking advantage of those 2-hour windows. Hardly a window is like a huge part of the day. It's a damn big
It
window.
is. It was.
That's a picture window. But you took advantage of that time to write. Okay, so now you're retired, and that changes your daily method of operation. And I know from having done my writing myself, when I was writing, what I was doing was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, so
Right.
that my goal was to put down 12 to 1,500 words every day. And some days that just flowed right out of me. Some days that took all the way till it was time to call it quits. Sometimes I didn't get to 1,200, but that was the
Right.
goal. What do you do now? You don't have that almost it was almost forced labor when you're on the train. Now what do you
Yeah.
do? What's your practice now?
My editors are so excited for me to move forward with my second book. They're offering to buy me a train ticket to ride the train back and forth. They said, look, the end of Long Island is a place called Montauk there, and that's a 4-hour train ride. So they're like, why don't we buy you a ticket to Montauk every day and just go back and forth? You can crank out a book in no time. I think that's drastic.
It beats the hell out of going to New York City.
You got that true. That's the other direction, and that's the way you don't want to go. So yeah, I think that was a little drastic, but I think that it's what's interesting to me is that I found that a lot of it is not work for me. If I'm actually developing the story, it's like watching a movie and being unhappy with the ending of the movie. You've invested 2 hours in a movie theater. You spent $25 for 2 people to go see a movie, and you walk out of the movie theater and everybody says, I hated that. Why did I waste the time and the money on that movie? So when you're writing, it's your movie, it's your ending, it's your characters. It can be exactly what you want it to be. It's tailor-made to please yourself. And so if I find the time to write and I finally sit down to write, I love what I'm writing. I love what's happening in the story. And the hardest thing for me about writing is you've got to create some negative space for positivity to happen. Bad things have to happen so they can be resolved. And that's conflict and solve makes your story. So I don't like to write anything sad. So I have to create the drama and then solve the issue. And so that's hard for me to write, the negative stuff. But then there's the stuff that comes along with solving it. And I'm like, well, how would I solve that? And how can I make it right for those people? And so it's sort of like when people sit down after dinner and sit down and watch 2 hours of television, I would like to get into the habit of sitting down watching 2 hours of my own television in my own mind and run my own little TV show in my mind and write my story. So it ends the way I want it to. And when it's time for a commercial or it's time to go to bed, I just turn it off and say, we'll find out what happens tomorrow to these folks and give me some time to think about it.
To be continued.
To be continued.
I've never heard an author express ever the way you express your process in terms of asking questions. I've never heard another author talk that way about it. And not that I've interviewed a lot of authors recently. Back in the old days when I had a radio show, I interviewed a lot of authors. Never heard anybody say that they asked the question of what would this person do next, or how do they get to where they're going, and what transpired on the way there. And you framed a lot of what your whole process in terms of asking questions. Was that just natural for you, or is that something that you discovered along the way? Was it something you learned from someone?
I think it was the way that I wrote it. Since I wrote it backwards, right, from the back to the front.
Right.
When it started to go backwards, I had to ask the question, why are they there? Okay. How did they get there? So I'd sit there and kind of think about that, like, well, how does that person at the beginning get to the person at the end? So it was a question I was asking myself all the time, like, how do I solve that? And I really do believe it's just like in your own life when you're solving problems all day long. Nobody's really thinking about that. Like you're solving problems every minute of your life, like whatever, getting ready for your show or anything that you're doing. When you're writing the book, this is real situations in your mind. And if the further you get into the book, the more it's real to you. So you are concerned when these things are happening to these characters. And I don't blur the line from reality. I'm not a nut, but when you're writing it, it's as real as it can be in your mind. And you really do need to solve it in a logical, believable way. You can't just go off and just make up something and think, well, that's a little flimsy. But the reader, they'll go with it. They really won't.
No, they won't.
If it's flimsy to you, it's
No,
flimsy to them. It's going to be twice as flimsy to them because you're trying to convince yourself,
Right.
So you really do, you had to make it solid and right. And like I said, and I can't give enough credit to my editors, Mary and John Dielman, because 1,000 questions I asked myself, they asked me 2,000 questions. They were like, is that really, you could say that? Is that really what he's thinking? And, so they were wonderful, raising the flag to make the story more genuine and more believable. And it was very cohesive through their help.
Cool. I want to ask you one more question. We're running out of time, but this is a very interesting question. And going back to when you were adopting your daughter, going to Sakhalin Island, what was it like interacting with the Russian people who lived there? What was your reception with them?
It was a very different society. And you could feel the pressure from the Soviet Union on these people. You could feel the lack of ambition from them, because in the world that they grew up in, everybody's job was very specific, and you didn't really go outside of that. So it was a much more controlled environment. So New Yorkers, especially New Yorkers, they were careful to say to us when we were on our way, they'd say, please do not do so much smiling. Because it seems to Russian people like it's very disingenuous. They would not appreciate that, and they think it is suspicious. And then you realize that when you're there, the populace has very little to smile about at times. And when you realize that we come from the world that has been forged here for all of us in America, it's a much more free, positive, and we smile readily because we have so much to smile about. But these people, their lives were much harder and much tougher than you could ever wrap your head around. And it was stunning to me, but they still were so lovely and very genuine with us. And a lot of the young people did speak English, and they wanted us to talk English to them because they wanted to practice.
So they were friendly and welcoming by and large.
Absolutely. And they were, again, it was New Yorkers and all the Americans that were there were all dressed very casually. That's a much more provincial society still. So people are very dressed up.
Really?
Nobody's out on the street. Yes. Well, when we were there, and it was that long ago, but it was much more a European flavor, even more so, more provincial, even Eastern European, I would say, where people, even though they didn't have a lot of money to spend, they were dressed beautifully. They were very soft-spoken. And even when we met our daughter, she reacted so strongly to the Russian people speaking to her. The way they would even speak to a baby is different than the way Americans would speak to a baby. You think everybody is like, ooh, 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 but the Russians had a different sound, and their voices were very melodical. So we would be like, ee! And they would be like, oh, and the baby would light up. And you'd see that it was a very romantic way that they spoke. So we really learned to appreciate Russian, the language, the Russian people, and it was a great experience for us.
Excellent. Wow. And, just a fascinating story from top to bottom. I love it. So for everybody, there's an email address on the screen. That's GrahamEEBailey.com. You can go to her website, learn more about her and the book and upcoming books. You can buy the book there. It will absolutely redirect you right to Amazon. one of these days I'm gonna get it straight on where to put the book, so I'm not hiding behind it. The book is Sakhalin, and as I mentioned to those of you who've been listening through the whole show, I just got my copy yesterday, started reading it today. I'm already fascinated. I'm like 2 very short chapters in. My wife read it last night. She says it's a page turner and a half. She loved it. So go check it out. And I know, you know what, Graham, they have on your website, is there a way for people to actually reach out to you if they want to ask you a question, if they want to talk to you and communicate
Yes.
with you?
Mhm.
Can they do that right on your website?
Yes. There's a
Fabulous.
contact.
All right.
And you also on Facebook, Instagram,
Excellent.
and
Excellent. And you do have a Facebook page, Graham E.E. Bailey.
yes,
So there you go, folks. You can always find him on the Facebook, you know.
that's right.
Got a few people here wishing you congratulations on the book. I would
Thank you.
reiterate that myself. Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
I find it a fascinating accomplishment. I read a book that I've referenced on the show many, many times called Growing Bolder. And in that book, at every chapter, they reference someone who accomplished something extraordinary, but didn't start until they were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s in some cases, before they even started what led to this extraordinary accomplishment. And your book obviously is an extraordinary accomplishment. Obviously, you're not in your 90s and your 80s, but you ain't in your 30s and 40s either. So congratulations. I think it's really it's fabulous. I totally enjoyed our conversation. For you folks who want to write it down, there's the email address. I'm going to bring that down here in just a second, but it's grahameebailey.com. Pretty easy to recognize and to remember. And once again, I thank you very much for being with us. And when the next book comes out, you're welcome to be here again when the next book comes out. You let me know when that's done and you're on.
That's wonderful. Thanks again. It's great being here.
My great pleasure. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Excuse me. All right, folks. There you have it. That was a great, great conversation with Graham Bailey. Absolutely adored that myself. I want to get some information up here for you so that you know this. New Thought Media Network is a total nonprofit organization. We live and breathe and die by virtue of what you bring to us in the way of donation. So go to New Thought Media. That's ntmedia.org. Click on donate. And once again, we are grateful for anything and everything that you wish to provide us with. Down below there is email address to contact me, teamrockitnow@gmail.com. And that's rocket like rocket baby, not rocket like rocket ship, @gmail.com. You can also reach my beloved Lisa and I on our branded Facebook page, Vibrant Aging, which obviously is a collaborator with Vibrant Living Hour. That's pretty much it. Again, my thanks to Graham Bailey for being with us today. That was just a fascinating story all the way around. And that's it for me. That's all I got for you. As always, I am immensely grateful for what is the great gift of your time and your attention. I wish you all the love and blessings the universe has to offer. I hope you'll join me next week right here at the Vibrant Living Hour. But until then, namaste, my friends.